Well, thanks guys for joining us for our webinar today. Looks
I'll
like we
keep
still have some
admitting them.
people.
Yeah, we have some people trickling in, but I'll keep admitting them while you speak.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, awesome. All right, it is a little early, at least on my coast. So yeah, we appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. We will be talking about the Executive Order 1428 and how it affects you. So let's go ahead and first discuss about why it came about. So we'll start with the infamous SolarWinds attack in 2019. And in this attack, threat actors actually turned the software into a weapon gaining access to several government systems and thousands of private systems around the world. So then in 2021, the Colonial Pipeline became the first physical attack that the U.S. actually caused, disruption here in the real world. So because of the Colonial attack, people on the East Coast were not able to get gasoline, and then gas prices went up. So that caused the president and the DoD to realize that cybersecurity is a big problem, and it needed to be addressed. So that's when the executive order requiring organizations to modernize the cybersecurity and adopt a zero trust model was drawn up and signed. So then jumping to 2021, Yubico released their first ever FIPS compliant and FIDO2 PIV hardware token. So that token had both the FIDO2 and the PIV. So then in 2022, we went ahead and released the Easy Smart Card that allows organizations to easily issue FIDO2 and PIV cards and allowing them to go fully passwordless. So now we'll go ahead and fast forward to March of 2024, and that's the deadline for when all these requirements will have to be adopted. And now we're going to go ahead and talk more about what is exactly Executive 1428.
Yeah, so what is exactly 1428? And it's honestly kind of simple. There's a lot of pages of jargon and everything, but we narrow it down. It's basically we have to move to the cloud and adopt zero trust. That's what we boil it down to. What does that mean? That means we have to have a baseline on our infrastructure, know what's normal in the infrastructure. The reason for that is if you don't have a baseline, attacks like the SolarWinds that are 0 days that are not known are very hard to detect because you don't know what's normal in the network. You don't know what's egressing, ingressing. So having that kind of like baseline allows you to detect those attacks. The other thing they want is actually a culture change. I think this is going to be the hardest one of all. So, and Nicole is going to talk a little bit more about it, but right now it's kind of like you get hacked or compromised or anything, and you try to pull it under the rug as fast as possible and not let anybody know. That has to change and actually share. The reason for that is if you get compromised, probably those attackers are using the exact same thing to attack someone else. So it's important to share it with the government, share it with your peers, and make sure that everybody's protected. Then they're establishing some safety board and kind of like playbook. And one of the main things that they're doing is you have to add multi-factor and unphishable credentials, as well as the scanning that we mentioned. But we're going to focus more on the identity side of things. The reason for that is our expertise is in identity, and we're an identity company.
Yeah, okay, so we'll talk more about why this is important. And like you all just mentioned, we're focusing on the identity side since we are an identity company. And according to the Verizon data breach, 69% of attacks that happened on the public sector can be tracked back to social engineering. So this means that someone by mistake gave a password or access to an account to someone that shouldn't have the access. So another thing is, adversaries are increasingly getting sophisticated. So previously, if you had a password and you put any other multi-factor authentication in, let's say like an SMS token, attackers could not get in. So of course, attackers continue to come up with more advanced methods where they can actually now steal those tokens and gain access. So another reason the order is so important, like Yigal just talked about, was getting things to change around the hesitancy of sharing when you get compromised. We actually saw a good example of this last week with the whole Twitter breach, and they really downplay that attack. And then they had to come out. First, they said it was just a few people, and then later they had to come out and admit it was way more than just a few people. So the federal government has had this high bar of unphishable credentials as a baseline of zero trust for a while now. And it's moving down the chain to cities, critical infrastructures, and eventually it'll hit the private sector as well, because they're not just extending the high bar to require the federal government anymore to adhere to these standards. Because as we know from past experiences, Even a contractor being attacked can lead to the federal government being compromised.
Yeah, and one of the things we wanted to talk about is not all MFA is the same. There's a lot of talk in this order about having unphishable credentials, removing all passwords. And the reason for that is we can see here a bunch of MFA listed, but they're not the same. So we have the high assurance unphishable credentials, and the reason they're called unphishable, I kind of don't really like that buzzword, but that's kind of like what the industry has adopted, is because it's very hard for a user to mess up and give out the credentials. So as we saw, many of the attacks, 69%, start with social engineering. That means someone calls up someone in the company or emails them and tricks them into giving the credential. That might be saying they're IT and they're testing something, or sending a phishing email, anything like that. That makes it that the user gives out their credential, even if it's protected, if it's long, anything. With FIDO2 and PIV, you cannot do that. You have your credential in these kind of like YubiKeys, and unless the user physically gives the YubiKey to someone, they cannot steal that credential. So that's kind of where the government is going. And then there is also push-based authentication. So that's the one that you get like on your phone, kind of a notification, and you say, yes, that's me. We have seen that one being broken by just spamming the user until they click yes, or tricking them, and then the user just out of habit just clicks yes every time. Then we have one-time passcodes that also can be breached by convincing the user to send you the one-time password. I also wanted to add SMS here. SMS is not really considered a great method anymore. The reason for that is really easy to just steal that passcode. Clone that SIM card, or get T-Mobile or anything to switch that SIM card to your phone and steal the passcode. So basically, if you're using SMS, please move to something else in the stack, preferably something like FIDO2 and everything. And the reason unphishable credentials are being pushed so hard is it's not only more secure, as we spoke, but it's also cheaper. And the reason for that is you have less support tickets, so it's actually easier to onboard users, get them that FIDO key, and then there's no way they forget their password because it's something they have, and then like a short pin, so there's no that password rotation and everything. The logins are way faster because once again, you're not entering a long password, then going to your phone, clicking yes. You just plug something in, put a short pin, and you're good to go. And that actually comes down to savings. So on average, a company will save $350 per user per year. And that comes down to user rotation, support cost, and so on. And there's actually a study that was done that there's a 203 ROI in 3 years, which, I mean, if all my investments could be that good, it'll be a really nice world. But basically, you might have like that steep onboarding cost of like, yeah, you have to spend $50 per user for the YubiKey, but in 3 years, you're gonna get that money back and some in increased productivity and saved on support costs. And this is not even accounting the amount of money you save by not having breaches, not having to hunt down attackers, and so on. So it is a really good investment, not only in the security, but also on the finance side of things. And one of the main questions people are asking about this order, because it's not very specified, is who's affected by this executive order. And basically, who is affected is government, federal government, small cities, and the critical infrastructure, which you can see here, the 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. But this diagram actually shows it even better, because yes, they are the ones that are directly affected by the 2024 deadline. But if you somehow are related to them, as Nicole mentioned, one of the things is they're protecting their supply chain. So basically, if you deliver something to them, you're part of their supply chain. So eventually they're going to ask you, hey, are you following these best practices? And the government has recommended everybody to adopt all these practices just because it's more secure and the government doesn't want companies to get hacked. So while you might not be fully affected by this, you will be in the next year. So it's better to get started, get ahead of the game, and secure your information.
Awesome. Thanks, Yigal. And so we're here to help. At Kudos, we have a team of experts that are passionate about identity and security. We've been doing this since the beginning of the whole passwordless movement. And we can do things like help find the gaps that you have in your current existing infrastructure, or to creating a roadmap of what you need to do, to helping with any implementation questions you might have. In fact, we know that going passwordless gives you a great ROI with faster logins, smoother user experiences, and increased security. But the question becomes, why are organizations having a hard time moving this direction? And a big reason that they aren't is because it can be difficult to get started. It can be hard to get that credential into the YubiKey. So that's where Ketos comes in with our experts. In fact, we actually designed Easy Smart Card during COVID. So it was the first fully passwordless onboarding experience that was designed for remote work. And Easy Smart Card makes it super easy to send those YubiKeys anywhere in the world, and then have users remotely onboard from home. And then they have the ability to identify that the user is logging in from home and that they are who they say they are. And it's just a really easy, just a few clicks and you're up and running. And in this webinar, we've mostly focused on the user side of things, but we also are moving to fully passwordless for service-to-service authentication. So Ketos can help you by bringing full visibility into your X509 certificates. So you can now automatically manage them with an automatic app credential rotation. So that allows your team to focus on more important tasks than scanning and finding every certificate, and then manually managing it. And it helps avoid those outages.
And last but not least, we have extension to Linux. So we have seen a lot of people that were like, hey, are you adopting multi-factor authentication? You're doing this? And they're like, yes, we have conditional access with Azure AD. We have this, we have that. And we're like, all right, amazing. What about Linux, where you have all your databases, where you have all that critical infrastructure? And they're usually like, well, that's managed by our engineers. We might have passwords. Some have SSH keys that are shared among the group. And unfortunately, none of those are multi-factor authentication. So passwords is something you know. And then SSH keys is something you have, because most people don't protect their SSH keys with passwords. So that's where we also come in and help you extend all that security, all that conditional access and everything that you have on Linux, that you have on AD to Linux, and we make it transparent to the user. So that's kind of like where we come in. And as Nicole said, we're very active on like Reddit and everything. Basically, our team of experts are just passionate about this subject. So even if you just have random questions about how to go fully passwordless and everything, we're happy to help. And now let's open it up for questions. So if you have any questions about this webinar, about the executive order, please put them down in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. And in the meantime, I'll answer one that we get a lot, and that's for certificate-based authentication, do you still need kind of like the whole on-premise footprint? Because usually for certificate-based authentication, you need your CA, you need ADFS, and all that set up to be able to use certificate-based authentication. Thanks to Azure, last month in Ignite, I guess it's 2 months ago now that it's December, they released Azure certificate-based authentication. That means that you don't need any of that. You can do everything fully cloud-based, and with Easy CA and Easy Smart Card, you can have a certificate authentication as a service, which makes it super easy, easier to set up, and easier to onboard users. So shout out to Microsoft for making that. It seems we don't have any other questions. So we want to thank you so much for joining this webinar, and good luck in this journey to meet the government requirements, and we're here to help.